What do you make of this decision coming from Donald Trump first day into the office? Is it the scrap of TPP withdrawal a political decision or an economic decision?
No, I think it's an economic decision. I think it's a bad decision. I've been a supporter of the Trans-Pacific Partnership for a long time. I think deeper integration in Asia-Pacific is good for all the economies involved. TPP set a high standard of opening up investment and trade and services. I think it was a good agreement, and I think it's a mistake to withdraw from it. But frankly, all the candidates in the U.S. presidential election were saying they were going to withdraw from it. So it reflects a growing protectionist sentiment in the United States, and clearly President Trump is following through on the protectionist ideas that he developed during the campaign.
All right. Is protectionism at this point in the United States, Mr. Zhang, from your perspective, a political one or actually a sound economic one?
I think this is both political and economic decision. Actually, my understanding is that the rationality of Trump administration is relying on 3 points. One is that he has made his promise come true, and first point. Second point, actually, he fully denied, the TPP agreement negotiated by Obama administration. Meanwhile, he can beat those groups from Republican. Third point is that he had showed his unsatisfied attitude on TPP tax. So that means some of TPP members, Japan, Singapore, this type of country, they need to reconsider their agreement with the U.S.
All right. The first 2 points, I guess we're all clear that he is trying to make a point and fulfill what he called the campaign promises. But really, on an economic sense, we need to make sense or make no sense of what his decision is. Mr. Dollar, so let's come into the specifics. What could the TPP create for the United States? There are many aspects of it. Let me just mention one of those that I have been reading some references about, that is creating bigger income for workers. According to the Patrick Plummer estimates, it's likely both the business executive owners and also the workers, including educated, well-educated, and less educated, their salaries are likely to increase at least 0.5% over the year as a result of U.S. joining the TPP. So if U.S. withdraw, there must be bigger elements of benefits vis-a-vis at least this argument. Mr. Dollar, do we have?
I'm sorry, I lost the feed.
Okay. So the argument is, Mr. Dollar, can you hear?
Yes, I just missed the last part of your sentence.
Okay. The argument is whether there's going to be bigger benefit for U.S. to withdraw from TPP. Earlier, the argument is workers, business executives, their income are all likely to increase as a result of joining. Now withdrawing, is there bigger arguments vis-a-vis the income increase of these workers and business executives as a result of withdrawing? Mr. Dollar.
Virtually all economists agree that free trade, open trade, this kind of agreement like Trans-Pacific Partnership, this raises the overall income and generally creates better jobs. Some sectors are going to be hurt. Whenever you engage in trade, some sectors will benefit, some will be hurt, but net there's a positive. Pretty much all economists agree on that. So it's really hard to see the logic of pulling out of this kind of agreement or perhaps pulling out of the NAFTA agreement. I think it's going to make the United States poorer, but it might benefit some specific sectors of the economy.
Like what?
Well, the U.S. imports a lot of labor-intensive manufactured products, for example. Now, I'm skeptical that much of that production would come back to the U.S. But if we trade less with countries that produce labor-intensive manufacturers, then maybe some of that production will come to the U.S. On the other hand, we export aircraft, we export high-tech machinery. We'll export less of that without these trade agreements. So we'll lose jobs, say, in the aircraft sector. Perhaps we'll gain some jobs in garments and footwear. I don't think that's a good trade-off for the United States.
Okay. Garments and footwear, are they likely to come back? Not only them, but also the car manufacturing. Mr. Yukon Huang is now joining us. Mr. Huang is a senior associate at the Carnegie Asia Program. Welcome, sir, as well. So what do you think? Well, President Trump has been meeting during his first few days in the office the CEOs of car manufacturers from the United States, asking them to build factories to produce cars to be consumed at home. Do you think they are likely to come back? Is the footwear, is the garment industry, is the coming back of the car industry to a certain extent likely to help people understand the ideology and the logic behind withdrawing from TPP?
The long-term consequences in industries like automobiles is complicated. If you think about it, 20, 30 years ago, Japanese cars are all made in Japan. And now a lot of them are made in the United States. So why are they made in the United States? Well, largely because they're very expensive to ship. They become very automated. It makes sense, actually, to locate some plants in the United States targeted to the American market. It also makes sense to locate plants in countries like Mexico, which have lower labor costs, to produce what I call the more basic cars. Now, one of the strange things that people have missed is that there are actually a lot of cars being produced in the United States and being exported to China in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. And this is startling because there are a lot of American cars also being produced in China. So what are these American-made cars being exported to China? And these are actually European models. Audis, BMWs, Mercedes-Benz, largely SUVs, produced in the United States but exported to China. So I think what you don't realize is that the complexities of the production change, where they're being produced, can shift over time. And when you try to influence or you try to steer this in ways, you actually probably increase costs, and ultimately over long periods of time it becomes less efficient.
Okay, that is interesting to us, the argument over there. Let's look at the other aspect of U.S. withdrawing from TPP and its possible impact elsewhere. Talk about the trade mechanism. TPP is quite a promising one, at least at the very end of the Obama administration. Mr. Zhang, TPP is gone. Not necessarily. Only the U.S. withdrawing. There are other members also that are embracing the idea of the TPP. But is the Trans-Pacific Partnership still going to be as strong or relatively strong as when the United States was a part of it?
This time, even if U.S. withdraw from TPP and also U.S. lost their credibility to other 11 negotiators, but TPP will be existing still because in the past, actually, there is P4. That means Singapore, Brunei, New Zealand, Chile, they already implemented. Yeah. So this time, actually, they had an ambitious goal that is 12 members. So given that the U.S. reluctant to join, meanwhile, Japan expressed their attitude that without the United States, TPP will make no sense. So Japan also will be a headache problem. So that means in the future, the possibility will be maybe P8 or P10.
All right.
Yeah, that's possible.
There is uncertain future about it, but they still exist. That is very important to make clear here.
Also, that would be a possible, integrated, integrated track for, Asia-Pacific integration in the future. Yeah.
Talking about Asia-Pacific integration, this has been a big topic. Everybody wants to jump on it. Remember, Mr. Dollar? I mean, when you were working in China, people were already talking about it. But now, TPP, U.S. withdrawal. What about the other mechanisms? RCEP, is it likely to be as attractive as the TPP to begin with?
I think the U.S. withdrawal from the TPP opens up a great opportunity for China. I see China as the leading force in the RCEP. It looks now that that'll be negotiated by the end of 2017. But RCEP is a good step forward, but it's not that deep an agreement. It doesn't go as far as TPP in areas like investment or services. So I think the key question for China is China ready to open up more on the investment and the service side? It doesn't have to keep the name of the TPP, but is China ready to be more of a leader in something deeper than RCEP? RCEP is a step. Can China go the next stage, really open up more? I think that would be beneficial for China. I think a lot of Asian Pacific economies would welcome that. And eventually the U.S. is going to come back around. This protectionist period in the U.S. is not going to be good for the U.S. economy or U.S. workers. So a few years from now, probably the U.S. will come back, be interested in agreements.
Okay.
Hopefully Asia Pacific economies will have made progress in the meantime.
Mr. Zhang, two questions related to what Mr. Dollar just said. One, there's a vacuum. As a result of the vacuum, U.S. not participating in TPP, is RCEP going to be the idea? Secondly, will China and other partners of the original TPP be able to come together, whether it's P4, P8, or P10, P11, be able to create something from now on for benefits of all? Those are, I think, very important questions, Mr. Zhang.
Yes. I don't think that this time TPP cannot make consensus and then it's turned to RCEP. I mean, actually, RCEP will rely on RCEP members' efforts in the near future. Especially, actually, RCEP also is a tough mission. All of countries have their headache problems. They need to negotiate. They need to overcome their barriers. On the other hand, I like to say that both small TPP and RCEP would be important platform for Asia-Pacific economic integration because of their existing. That means that we can see the possible FTAP by 2025. In this regard, I think that both TPP and RCEP should be appreciated by all members in this region.
Okay, here comes the even more interesting question. There's TPP, there's RCEP. TPP, U.S. not participating. RCEP, as a result, probably getting more spotlight, but that's not the ultimate solution to free trade in the region. And there is another idea, Mr. Huang, you have to help us out about that. That is FTAAP, Free Trade Agreement for the Asia-Pacific region. That means China has to participate. That also means if it's Asia-Pacific, U.S. also has to participate in order to make it a real entity. Chinese President Xi Jinping in Davos was already circulating a lot of inspirations about how to move this thing forward. How long do you think that people can move this entity and concept forward? And secondly, will future political environment inside the United States, let's just say after a few months, be able to allow the bureaucracies in the U.S. at least to move on discussions about this? Mr. Huang.
Well, I think you've basically addressed the key issue. Ultimately, in the long run, you do need a free trade agreement for the Asia Pacific, an agreement which includes both China, includes the United States. Actually, you should even go a bit further. It needs to include Europe. If you look at what's happening in Asia, Asian countries, including China, they import a lot of parts and components from other Asian countries. They import a lot of commodities from other countries. And then they produce finished goods. And these goods go to the United States, and they go a lot to Europe. So you cannot actually complete this kind of a trade arrangement based upon the supply chain without agreements which include both China, the United States, and even Europe. So ultimately, in the long run, a free trade agreement for Asia Pacific is part of the agenda. I think everyone thought of RCEP and TPP as building blocks with the ultimate goal, a much broader trade arrangement. So ultimately speaking, for example, I would actually think that China would say to RCEP members, let's ask the U.S. to become an observer for RCEP now that the TPP has gone to the wayside, because ultimately we have a much broader objective in mind.
Very interesting. Mr. Dollar, what's your sense?
No, I agree with Yukon that the long-term objective, I mean, we'd really like a global deal, but if you could get China, the U.S., and the European Union in the same agreement, that would be an enormous step forward. I think the next couple of years it's going to be difficult given this political trend in the United States. So I agree it makes sense for China to pursue RCEP, and I also think it's in China's interest to move ahead with its own plans for opening up more sectors of the economy, whether it's part of an agreement or not.
Right. We talk about these concepts not in a way as a result of certain kinds of desire to compete among different kinds of mechanisms, but discuss it in a way, in a rational way, so that we know where is the win-win situation for everybody in the region. I think that is extremely important. Not only multilaterally, but also bilaterally as well, if President Trump is talking about bilateral trade deals. If we look at China and the United States bilateral, United States has long been blaming trade with China for its ballooning trade deficit. But if you look at the figures from the International Monetary Fund that show the U.S. trade deficit started to rapidly increase since the year 1990s and eased from the year 2009 after the financial crisis. Meanwhile, China's trade surplus with the United States only started to grow beginning from the year 2005, the year it joined the World Trade Organization. So you can see there's a huge time difference between these. So the U.S. trade deficit has grown long before China became an export giant. When we make political statements, these political statements, whether from China or United States, has really to be based on fact. Only that would be a, can we say, a responsible politician. Having said that, though, let me come back to the three of you about bilateral. BIT, bilateral trade agreement, being discussed between China and the United States, long there, and yet no result. A lot of hot spots over there, Mr. Huang. Will the current political environment help the two countries come closer for agreement, or actually put them further apart?
Well, I think the current political environment is turning quite negative. If I would say a few years ago, it was it's very strong in U.S. interests to forge a bilateral investment treaty with the United States. As David Dollar indicated, China's investment regime is quite restrictive in certain sectors, particularly services. And opening up the service sector is good for China, it's good for the United States, so I think that's a good thing. But if you think about it, what is the mentality now in Washington? The mentality now in Washington is that they think that American companies are investing too much overseas, they're investing too much in China, this leads to job loss. So I personally do not see, for example, that a bilateral investment treaty is going to be very high on the agenda, and that's a shame, because I think it is an area, in fact, where both China and the United States could gain from further liberalization.
All right, Mr. Dollar, your sense, your judgment?
Well, I think the Obama administration tried very hard to negotiate this bilateral investment treaty, and frankly, I think China missed an opportunity. You know, if China had moved more quickly, agreeing to open up more sectors, I think we would have a healthier economic relationship, and that would be a good foundation for our overall relationship. Now, it's really hard to see pursuing that BIT over the next few years.
Okay.
What Yukon just said makes a lot of sense. We're not going to see this as a priority for the U.S. administration.
Mr. Zhang, we well understand at this point, this administration coming into power, trying to scrap off all the previous agreements, trade deals, the previous administration had with everybody. Yeah. Even if there were any BIT agreement between China and the United States, I'm not sure whether that's likely to continue for the next few years when this administration comes in. Mr. Zhang, at this point, what can China do, really?
Yeah, first point, I think that BIT between China and the U.S. Need to be continued in the next few years. Of course, China is accelerating our new round of reform and opening up, especially in service sectors and in high-end manufacturing sectors. Of course, from Trump administration, it seems that he is more like to have bilateral free trade agreements with other economies, even if that will make United States pay more cost. In this regard, I think that from Chinese side, we will be more positive to negotiate BIT. In the future, of course, we also hope to have opportunity to negotiate free trade agreements with the United States. Of course, bilateral free trade agreements. Of course, my understanding is that that will take a long time.